Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Carole Bucy. She's the Davidson County historian. She has a PhD in history, and she's been in this position since 2011. She has a popular class, Nashville 101 and 102, which I need to attend. And she's going to be, we're fortunate to have her as a speaker. So Carole, can you take it from here?
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here and to share with you some of my knowledge of the history, not just of Second Avenue, but Nashville. And honestly, they are one and the same. Let's see if I can get my screen share up now. I've got it on where, there we go. Now, can you see my PowerPoint? Ron, can you see it? Good. My microphone is no longer muted, and I'll get to full screen. I'm going to give you a very brief look back at Nashville history, and really and truly, Second Avenue is a glimpse of the story of our entire city, back from the very beginning and up to the present. So let's take a look at how it all began, at least in terms of what became a frontier town and then a metropolis. First of all, there were journeys, and all of us have made one of these journeys or another. Here comes James Robertson, and a young man in his 30s, but filled with ambition and drive and courage. And he and John Donaldson are hired by a land developer, so to speak, Richard Henderson, a land speculator, to come and populate this area that Robertson has identified. It is a place where a salt creek comes into the Cumberland River, and just a little bit down, another creek that we now know as Browns Creek comes into the Cumberland River. That is still there. They are now under conduits, but we have that exact location still with us. Now, they arrived, first of all, the Donaldson party came by water, far more dangerous and far more difficult. They arrived about 4 months after the Robertson party, who had come primarily by foot and then down to this spot that Robertson had identified. But there were many women and children, families of some of the earlier Robertson party, who were with John Donaldson's party on the flatboats. They arrived in April of 1780 and immediately went to work. Within a week or so after the Donaldson party's arrival, the men of this community, which are about 250 more or less, this is a big crowd for a place where Anglo-Americans have not lived up to this point, they sign a document known as the Cumberland Compact. It mainly says, we will have order. We will have some judges. We will have a way to record our records of land claims so that when the Revolutionary War is over, whichever side might win, we will have our claims staked on this beautiful area that some people actually referred to as the Eden of the West. So just 4 years after the Donaldson party arrives, the Cumberland Compact has been signed. North Carolina has recognized this area to be part of North Carolina. Its western borders, can you believe it, went all the way to the Mississippi River. Thomas Malloy comes in and lays out a plat for what will become Nashville. Look at these nice squares that he has produced on his map. And you see we have Water Street, sometimes known as Front Street, here facing the Cumberland River. Here you see the Salt Creek. It's also referred to as the French Lick. A salt lick is a source of salt that comes up out of the ground that attracts animals. And then over here, you have what is referred to sometimes as Wilson Springs, and Browns Creek is over here as well. So here we have a public square being identified, Market Street, and a lot of other streets as well. And it will take fully probably 50 years before this will all be really filled out. But you see the optimism that these people who came had from the very beginning. They had such an entrepreneurial spirit. They were really eager to stake a claim here in what was known as the West. Here is an 1804 map of Nashville. It is a rather hand-drawn map, isn't it? And you see here, once again, we have the waterfront here, the Cumberland River. On this map, Market Street is identified as Main Street, but that will primarily be called Market Street. And so here we see people are beginning to spread out a little bit. You see over here beyond where the Bicentennial Mall is today, John McNary's Spring, as it was called, this salt lick here, and he had a residence here. So Nashville begins to grow. This is a more artistic rendering of that map that's on the walls of our beautiful public library downtown. And it really shows the potential. If you look in that stairway, there are beautiful murals of all of Nashville's history around the walls. Now, it certainly doesn't take much time for us to get somebody here who wants to sell things. A merchant. Lardner Clark did not come with the Robertson party, but he came presumably with some horses packed with goods. He had learned that there was a community over here, and he wasn't going to miss the opportunity to sell whatever the people living here might want. He established a dry goods store in keeping with the entrepreneurial spirit. He had a little bit of everything there on the Front Street, Market Street part of the public square. He had a tavern. He ran a tavern. He took in boarders and as sort of an innkeeper of sorts. He ran all manner of sales in a variety of things. And he had this porch across the front of his house that was known as the Piazza, where lots of Nashville's business took place. Lardner Clark, among other things, was on the board of the University of Nashville when it began. Now, the wharf. The wharf really came as the future from that early founding to Nashville becoming a commercial center. Nashville grows, albeit slowly in the beginning, because Nashville was claiming land that the Chickamaugans and other Indian Native American tribes did not want Anglo-Americans to take from there. This area was hotly contested for about, let's say 14 or 15 years before the final treaties were signed between the settlers and the Native American tribes. Indeed, about half of the population that were here in May 1780, when the Cumberland Compact was signed, they had died or been killed or left and gone to Kentucky, which was safer because it was so difficult here. And yet the people who stayed, they were filled with great determination. Charlotte Robertson, James Robertson, all of this plethora of people who were here. And I want to make it clear from the very beginning, there were enslaved people here. They came with the Robertson-Donaldson parties. There were a few, very few, free African descent, free Black men of African descent who were with them, but mostly there were slaves. Now, granted, as long as it is such a primitive village and the control and life is so tenuous, everybody is going to be treated more or less equal. But whatever the worst and hardest jobs were, They were always given to the enslaved people. And we need to keep that in mind as we talk about the history of our city. So the steamboats start coming after the War of 1812, and the War of 1812 put us on the map. We suddenly are a prosperous city. And here's a shot of the waterfront in the 1940. The Marquis de Lafayette pays us a visit. The city rolls out the red carpet. He came to the United States. That's an image of his visit to New York City. And he tours the area. 2nd Avenue, Market Street was front and center in Lafayette's visit. A big parade down 2nd Avenue to the public square. We also had a Jewish community started here before the Civil War. The Gay Street Synagogue, Fedora Small-Frank wrote a very fine book, Beginnings on Market Street, which is the heart of Nashville's Jewish community. There were buildings built here before the Civil War. Lots of construction going on always around that public square as we went from a primitive courthouse to a more modern courthouse to a more modern courthouse. Several different reconfigurations of a courthouse. So by the time the Civil War comes, there is a downtown area, and that is what the grid looked like by the time the Civil War begins. Now, the Civil War in Nashville was quite different from in all the other cities. Nashville, Don Doyle, a historian of Nashville, who's written two very fine books about Nashville, said that the New South Nashville began when the Union Army came into town in early 1862 and occupied Nashville. Nashville did not have the damage that the other southern cities, such as Richmond or Atlanta, had. And so when the Civil War ended, Nashville was ready to get things going. And this is New South. It is the Gilded Age. And this is when so many of these beautiful buildings on 2nd Avenue, Market Street, were developed. The Historical Commission staff and I are working on identifying not only the buildings, but the people who had these buildings. Nashville becomes a wholesale center, primarily because of the steamboats, and then the railroads come in. And so we have salesmen going out selling all manner of things, hardware, fabric, tools, you name it. We had a high circle of people who were selling pharmaceuticals. There were a lot of pharmaceutical salespeople at the beginning of the 20th century. Here we see another look down Market Street. We see some wagons here. If you go back through the newspapers, you see the history of the city, getting a sewer line, repaving Market Street over and over, and the improvements in paving. And one thing that really comes out loud and clear is the number of fires that they had on Market Street, and how many times people came back again and again and rebuilt what they had. So here is just a glimpse of what Nashville had. It was Nashville's claim to fame, and Nashville rebuilt itself as a commercial center, the Wall Street of the South. Again and again, 2nd Avenue reflected the voice of the community. And I have every confidence that 2nd Avenue will indeed reflect what we want this city to be another time here very soon. Thank you very much.